Hey everyone, Damien the Kung Fit Coach here. Today we're going to be talking about why you should be incorporating science into your training rather than just listening to Dave down the gym. It's time to get serious. First things first, yes, these are actually my glasses. But more importantly, if you do find this video useful, make sure you hit the like and subscribe buttons. Also, leave a comment down below if you're going to start incorporating more science into your training, and let me know what videos on scientific training you'd like to see in the future. Right, first thing we need to talk about is the hierarchy of evidence. What's this? It's essentially a way of understanding how much credence we should give to any bit of evidence. It's primarily aimed at evidence-based medicine, but we can use it as a tool for understanding how we should go about our training too. In the typical representation, we have articles and expert opinions down at the lower end, and then meta-analyses and systematic reviews up at the top. In between, we have increasingly controlled studies as we go up. We could probably put Dave from the gym down at a lower tier, maybe even below this bottom one, unless he happens to be an expert or a particularly well-read researcher. And as we go up the table, we generally get a higher quality of evidence and less risk of bias in the results, if not the reporting. More on that later. Therefore, as we go up the pyramid, we can be more confident that the recommendations will have a positive impact upon our training, and so by looking at the research, we can find out what the best approach is. The effect of incorporating science into your training might be bigger or faster improvements, better performance, increasing the efficiency of your training. In other words, being bigger, faster, stronger, more flexible, all with less effort and in less time. That is the absolute best case scenario. Worst case scenario, the science shows that you're already doing the best thing, there's nothing to be improved, or potentially that there's no clear-cut answer yet. There's just not enough evidence either way. It's in these situations where potentially you need to start looking at some of the lower tiers of evidence, but still you don't want to take just a handful of cases and take that as proof. Now, the hierarchy of evidence itself is not perfect, and there has been some criticism of some of the details, but as a general rule of thumb, it works. If we do want to improve this tool, we can make use of the grade approach, which takes into factors such as quality of the research, and this really is key, and to be honest, where a lot of people slip up when looking at scientific literature. Having looked at an awful lot of published papers on everything ranging from brain and eye physiology through to psychology and archaeology for my PhD, I can tell you that not every published peer-reviewed paper is good. Some of them are even pretty bad. So let's talk about when you shouldn't listen to the science. Sometimes a piece of research just isn't particularly good. The experiment itself might be okay, but maybe the data analysis is off. You might look at the data and it seems to say one thing, whereas the paper itself is offering a conflicting story. This is why it's important to have some understanding of the scientific method, but most importantly to actually read the full paper, not just skim the abstract. This is a problem with a lot of scientific reporting in the media. They just don't go beyond the headline. For example, this is why you see so many articles and blog posts out there saying you should never stretch before exercise. But really, it's just not that straightforward. This is also why you should look at more than just one or two papers, and why you need to understand that hierarchy of evidence. For example, a meta-analysis can smooth out some of the problems you might get with a handful of papers. Now, another time that you shouldn't listen to the science is when it's inconclusive. It's very rare that a single study is so well designed, has such a large number of participants, and has such a clear effect that on its own it can be taken as proof of something. You generally need multiple studies. And sometimes these studies are conflicting. So you need to be able to look at enough studies to pick apart the evidence, assess the quality of the arguments, and try and work out where the truth actually lies. And it just takes time for these studies to appear. They don't necessarily exist on the topic that you're looking at yet. This leads directly into the last situation in which you can't listen to the science. And this is when it just hasn't been done, or at least not enough of it yet. Sometimes coaches come up with new ideas and it takes a little time for that to filter through to the scientific community, for experiments to be designed and conducted, and to get a really good body of evidence looking at a particular thing. In these situations, you have to rely on a coach that you trust, or maybe even your own personal experience. But if the scientific evidence does directly contradict what you're doing, then I'm afraid it's wrong, and it's time for a change. A great example of this is partial range of motion when lifting weights. Now, although there aren't many studies looking at this topic, there are some, and almost all of them favour full range of motion. Yet many people still claim that partial ranges of motion are better for muscle growth. This doesn't mean that you can't grow muscle with a partial range of motion, or that it hasn't worked for some people, but a handful of examples don't constitute proof. Might they have made better gains of full range of motion? We can never know. It's true that certain populations may respond differently to training, and that maybe they haven't been studied in the science, but until better evidence comes along, we have to go with the highest quality evidence that we have. And once again, that's the scientific studies, not Dave down the gym or some guy on YouTube with nothing but an opinion. Currently, I'm looking at research on stretching because I want to design myself the best stretching program possible. Now, in amongst this, I found 2 studies looking at something called micro-stretching. With one of them, I don't think one of the conclusions quite matches the data, and the other study doesn't quite look at the same thing, so I'm not sure I can take its claims at face value, but it does show some promise. But in the absence of any other papers looking at it, I can't be sure either way. That being the case, I've decided to explore the issue myself. Now, I can't do a randomised controlled trial, but I can at least experiment on myself a little. So for one leg, I'm going to make use of micro-stretching, and for the other, I won't. And I'll try to ascertain, at least for myself, whether this is worth incorporating into my practice in the long term. So to summarise then, if you incorporate science into your training, it is going to make it better. But if the science hasn't been done yet, or the evidence isn't of a high enough quality, it's okay to fall back on personal experience or the advice of a trusted coach. But please remember, abs. Always be skeptical. If you're lucky, you've got a great coach that follows the science, but not all do. If your training directly contradicts what the science says, then it's time to make a change. Finally, please, 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 never take an article or blog post at its word. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. If you have, make sure you give the like and subscribe buttons a good hard Marbu punch, and I will see you in the next one.